They kicked the black man out of first class. Loud, public, embarrassing. The whole plane turned to stare as two flight attendants hovered above him, like he didn't belong, like he was dirt on a white carpet. "Sir," one of them said with forced politeness stretched tight over her lips, "you need to return to economy. This seat is for first-class passengers only." The man didn't flinch. He looked up, calm but firm. "This is my seat, 1A. I booked it." "No," snapped the second attendant, a taller woman with a platinum bun wound so tightly it looked painful. Her name tag read Cheryl. "That's not possible. We checked. That seat belongs to someone else." "I have the ticket," the man said, lifting his phone. "Boarding pass. Seat 1A. I checked in like everybody else." "But you don't look like someone who flies first class," Cheryl muttered under her breath. The words weren't meant to be heard, but they were, clear as day. The cabin went quiet. First-class passengers shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats. The man blinked, slowly, measured. But he didn't rise. Instead, he calmly pulled his wallet from the inside of his tailored navy blazer and produced a black card thicker than usual, almost metallic. "Look again," he said quietly, voice low but undeniable. "Name's Elias Carter." Cheryl hesitated. Her partner leaned in to check the manifest on her tablet. Then her face paled. "Sir, she began. "You what?" Elias asked, his voice still even, but his dark eyes beginning to burn with something deeper. "Older. A lifetime of being mistaken, underestimated, dismissed." "I didn't realize," Cheryl stammered. "You're the Elias Carter." The man finally rose from his seat, all 6'3" of him, regal, imposing, controlled. "Yes," he said, "the Elias Carter, founder and majority owner of Skyward Airlines, the airline you work for." Cheryl's mouth opened, then closed. Around them, gasps stirred the cabin like wind before a storm. A man in 1C suddenly became very interested in his glass of champagne. A woman with a Louis Vuitton scarf ducked her head. "I'd like to speak to your captain," Elias said. "No, please, Mr. Carter." The first attendant begged. "There's no need to escalate." "We didn't know. That's the problem." Elias cut in, his voice rising just enough to echo across the cabin. "You didn't care to know. You assumed I didn't belong. Because of how I look." From economy, people craned their necks, eyes wide. Cell phones emerged recording. A moment passed, heavy. And then Elias looked at the empty seat beside his. "Now," he said, "if you'll excuse me, I'd like to sit in my seat. And I'd like some peace on this flight." Neither Cheryl nor the other attendant moved for a moment. Then, as if jolted by an invisible command, they stepped back. The man reclaimed his seat, but the damage was done. Word of the incident spread before takeoff. On the tarmac, in the air, and across the internet, hashtags exploded. Elias Carter #Skyward owner kicked out trended globally. 2 hours into the flight, Captain Monroe emerged from the cockpit. He approached Elias with a humility that bordered on reverence. "Mr. Carter," he said, removing his cap. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known." "It's not about knowing," Elias interrupted. "It's about seeing, listening, or respecting." Monroe nodded, shame spreading across his face. "Understood. I'll make sure this is addressed immediately." Elias gave a small nod and leaned back, finally closing his eyes. But inside his mind, memories spun like reels on fire, because this wasn't the first time. And now, it would be the last. 28 years earlier, Elias stood outside a dusty little hangar in Georgia, staring up at a rust-covered plane with a bent propeller. His hands were calloused, grease under his nails. The scorching sun bore down on the back of his neck. "You ain't ever gonna make it in aviation, boy," his uncle had scoffed. But Elias didn't listen. He had read every flight manual cover to cover by the time he was 15. Fixed engines for local crop dusters. Took flying lessons at night with borrowed money. Got his license. Then another. And another. He had been told no more times than he could count. Rejected from every corporate pilot program. Denied funding. Laughed out of boardrooms. But still, he climbed. Still, he rose. And by 45, he owned jets. Not one, hundreds. Back in the present, the plane landed in Los Angeles. Ground staff scrambled the moment they learned the truth. Journalists waited at the terminal. Elias stepped off the aircraft with quiet authority, flanked by security, his assistant Sienna jogging to meet him. "We've got press at the gate," she said breathlessly. "I can reroute." "No," Elias said. "Let them see me." He walked straight into the cameras. A reporter shoved a mic forward. "Mr. Carter, what's your response to what happened on board?" Elias didn't blink. "My response is simple," he said. "You don't judge people by the color of their skin, their clothes, or where you think they come from. You judge them by their character, their actions, their spirit." Another mic. "Will the flight attendants be fired?" "I don't make decisions in anger," Elias replied. "But there will be accountability. This airline stands for more than profit. We stand for dignity." The crowd erupted in applause. Even other passengers, now gathered nearby, began clapping. One woman stepped forward, young, maybe 25, with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I'm studying aviation. I've never seen someone like me own something like this. Thank you." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Keep flying," he said, "no matter what they say." Back at Skyward headquarters the next day, Elias sat at the head of the long boardroom table. The entire executive team was there. He clicked the remote, and the large screen behind him lit up with a paused video still, Cheryl standing above him mid-argument. "The world saw what happened," he said. "But this isn't about a viral moment. It's about a culture." He paused. "I built this airline so people could rise, fly beyond limits. But if we allow prejudice to sit in first class, we fail." The room was dead silent, effective immediately. Elias continued, "We're launching a full inclusivity audit. From cabin crew to corporate, new training, new hiring standards, and Cheryl." He turned to the corner of the room where the now former flight attendant sat with her eyes downcast. "You're no longer with Skyward, but you will go through restorative education before any future in aviation. You have a chance to grow. Take it." She nodded, choking back tears. I'm sorry, I know," Elias said, standing. "Just make sure the next person you judge gets more than an apology." As he walked out, the team stood in silence, not out of fear, out of respect. Elias Carter was more than a CEO. He was a man who turned humiliation into transformation, who rose from a dusty hangar to the helm of the skies. Months later, Skyward Airlines led the industry in equity, transparency, and trust. Recruitment soared. Passengers praised the changes. And every first-class cabin bore a new plaque. "This seat was once denied to a man who owned the skies. We fly today because he didn't give up." Elias saw it once during a surprise inspection. He read the words quietly, then turned to the new stewardess. "You know the story behind this?" he asked. She smiled, her skin the same rich brown as his. "Yes, sir," she beamed. "It's why I'm here." And as the engines roared to life, Elias Carter smiled, because he knew finally this flight was only just beginning. The hum of the engines faded into the background as Elias settled into seat 1A on a different flight weeks later, this time with no conflict, no eyes narrowing in suspicion, no whispered doubt. The steward, a young man with braided hair and a crisp smile, handed him a hot towel and a glass of ginger tea without hesitation. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," the steward said warmly. "It's an honor." Elias nodded, appreciation flickering in his gaze. "Call me Elias, and thank you for that." The flight was headed to Nairobi, an important destination for the new African hub. Skyward Airlines had just opened. Elias wasn't just visiting for publicity. He was meeting with young entrepreneurs, investing in aviation schools, and building pipelines for African talent into an industry that had long shut them out. Across the aisle, a woman in her late 40s watched him closely. She wore a conservative pantsuit, a silver brooch glinting on her lapel. After a few moments of indecision, she leaned across the aisle. "I just wanted to say," she began, hesitating, "I saw What happened? The video. I teach ethics in business. I show it in my class now. Elias turned to her, his expression softening. Do you? Yes, she nodded. The moment you stayed calm, that you stood your ground, but didn't humiliate them, it changed how my students see leadership. Elias took a moment, then replied, leadership isn't about being loud. It's about being rooted. You don't have to shake the earth when you're already standing on bedrock. The woman smiled, a bit teary. I hope you know, you're shaping more than airlines. Elias nodded thoughtfully. That's the goal. As the plane lifted into the sky, the clouds below unfurled like silk. He stared out the window, remembering another flight. Decades ago, one he couldn't afford. One he'd watched take off from the grass outside the fence, barefoot, dreaming, in Nairobi. The reception was nothing short of royal. Dozens of young cadets stood at attention in their academy uniforms, waiting by the hangar. Cameras flashed. The Kenyan Minister of Transport shook Elias's hand with both palms, laughing heartily. My brother, he declared, you're not just building runways, you're building futures. Elias gave a modest smile. We all deserve wings. I'm just making sure they have somewhere to take off. He spent hours touring the new Skyward Africa Aviation Academy. Inside, walls were lined with photos of pioneers Bessie Coleman, the Tuskegee Airmen, and now Elias Carter. Students buzzed with energy, asking questions about aircraft engineering, logistics, and how to rise in a world so tilted. One student, a girl no older than 17, approached him nervously. Sir, she began, hands trembling slightly, I want to be the first black woman to pilot an intercontinental commercial flight. They say I dream too big. Elias crouched slightly to meet her eye. They told me the same thing. She blinked. What did you do? He smiled. I made the sky mine. Meanwhile, back in New York, Skyward headquarters was evolving. The new Diversity and Ethics Division, personally overseen by Elias, had created sweeping reforms. Cabin crews were retrained. Bias reporting channels were streamlined and monitored by third parties. A full mentorship program was launched for underrepresented groups in aviation, and Cheryl, she was now giving talks voluntarily after her termination. Cheryl had gone through restorative justice workshops. She wrote a public letter of apology, not the kind vetted by lawyers, but a raw, honest account of her internal bias. And the moment she realized what she had done, I didn't just disrespect a man, she said at one event. I disrespected a movement, and I was blind until I saw myself on camera, saw what I'd become. Mr. Carter didn't humiliate me. He gave me a mirror. I'm doing everything I can to fix what I broke. The room applauded. Elias, sitting in the back that night, gave a quiet nod. At the Nairobi Hilton that evening, Elias sat on a rooftop balcony with Sienna, sipping rooibos tea as the city sparkled below. You did it, she said. They respect you everywhere. Even your critics can't deny it anymore. He chuckled softly. Respect wasn't the goal. Change was. She looked at him. Do you ever wish you hadn't boarded that flight? That you just sent someone else? No, Elias said immediately. That humiliation, that moment, it was a gift. Not one I asked for, but one I needed. It pulled the curtain back on how far we still have to go, and it lit a fire under people who'd been sitting in silence. He stood and stretched, his gaze scanning the cityscape. You know what the most dangerous seat is on a plane? He asked. Sienna raised an eyebrow. Middle seat on a red eye with a crying baby. He laughed. Close, but no. The one that's empty, because someone got told they didn't belong. Sienna went quiet. She understood. A year later, the Skyward Excellence Award ceremony took place in Atlanta, not far from the tiny hangar where Elias once dreamed of flight. The guest list was international ambassadors, aviation legends, dreamers, survivors. Elias walked on stage to a standing ovation. He took the mic and looked out at a crowd filled with faces like his mother's, his father's. his ancestors. There was a time, he began, when they told me I couldn't sit in first class. Today, I invite you to own the airline. The crowd erupted. He waited, then continued. You see, success isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about proving us right, about reclaiming what's ours. The sky, the ground, the future. His voice thickened slightly. This airline started with one man who refused to stay grounded, but it belongs to all of us now. And then, as the room fell to silence, he added one final line. If they ever tell you to go back to economy, look them in the eye and say, I own the damn plane. The room exploded in applause, cheers, whistles. The world had witnessed Elias's humiliation, but now it bore witness to something greater, his revolution. And somewhere, far above, a plane pierced the clouds, flying higher than anyone ever thought it could. 3 weeks after the awards ceremony, Elias Carter found himself once again at the Skyward Terminal in Atlanta. This time, he wasn't flying for business, nor for appearances. He was flying home to visit his mother in Savannah, a woman who'd once worked 3 jobs so he could take flying lessons in secret. He walked through the terminal quietly, without the entourage, without the blazer or the headlines, just a black polo, dark jeans, and a carry-on slung casually over his shoulder. He moved like any other passenger, but head still turned. Staff smiled. A janitor gave him a discreet thumbs up. A pilot paused mid-conversation and saluted him. Near gate 34, a young black girl sat with her mother, clutching a model airplane. Her hair was braided with beads, her eyes wide and curious. She spotted Elias first, gasped, and tugged her mother's sleeve. That's him. Mama, that's Mr. Skyward. Elias turned, smiled, and knelt beside her. Hey there, he said. What's your name? Amira, she replied, clutching her plane tightly. I want to be a pilot like you. My teacher showed us the video. Elias nodded thoughtfully. Well, Amira, I have a feeling you're going to fly even higher than I ever have. Her eyes lit up. Her mother mouthed thank you with tears brimming. He handed her a card. On the back, a private invitation to Skyward's future aviators camp, fully sponsored. See you next summer. He winked. Then he stood, adjusted his bag, and continued toward the gate. On the plane, Elias took a seat in row 12 economy by choice. The woman next to him, white, about 70, glanced at him, then back at her book. For a few minutes, there was silence. Then she turned slightly. You look familiar, she said. Have we met? Elias chuckled. Maybe. I get that a lot. What do you do? She asked. He shrugged. Fly. Build things. Try to make change. She tilted her head. Ah, an optimist. A realist who refuses to give up, he corrected gently. She smiled. That's rare. They fell into an easy conversation. She was a retired history teacher. She'd taught during segregation, seen schools desegregate, watched civil rights leaders rise and fall. Now, in her old age, she was watching a new kind of change take flight. You remind me of someone, she said finally, a man I read about. He stood up after being kicked out of first class. Didn't scream, just stood taller. That man made me proud to be American again. Elias didn't say a word. He simply smiled and extended his hand. Elias Carter, he said. She blinked, then laughed soft and stunned. Well, I'll be damned. At his mother's home. A small yellow house with chipped paint but endless warmth. Elias sat on the porch as cicadas hummed in the Georgia dusk. His mother, Miss Thelma Carter, stepped out with 2 glasses of sweet tea and that knowing smile of hers. You still don't sit still for long, she teased, easing into the rocking chair beside him. Trying to learn, he said, sipping. You're always reaching, she said softly, even when we didn't have enough to eat. Your eyes were up, watching planes, dreaming. He turned to her. You never told me to stop dreaming. I never would. The world tells black boys enough times they can't. I wasn't about to add to that. He nodded. You didn't just raise me. Mama, you launched me. She chuckled. Well, Lord knows I didn't raise you to be humble. He laughed, and they sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars blink to life. Then Thelma said, "What you did on that plane, staying calm, speaking up, not fighting fire with fire. Your daddy would have been proud." Elias swallowed hard. "I wish he could see all this." "He sees it," she said simply. "Every time you lift someone else. Every time you take what they used to shame you and turn it into power." That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stepped out barefoot onto the grass behind the house. Looking up at the sky that once seemed impossible, he thought of the faces: Cheryl's shame, Amira's wonder, Sienna's loyalty, his mother's strength. He thought of every door slammed in his face, every condescending smile, every time someone handed him a broom instead of a blueprint. And then he smiled, because every one of those moments had carved the man he was now. He didn't just own an airline, he owned his story. 6 months later, Skyward Airlines launched its newest campaign. It aired during the Super Bowl. No celebrity cameos, no flashy graphics, just Elias, standing on a tarmac, planes behind him. He looked into the camera and spoke. "They told me I didn't belong in first class. I thanked them, because I didn't come to sit. I came to fly." Fade to black. Then white letters, Skyward Airlines, fly on your terms. The commercial went viral before halftime. By then, Skyward was the fastest growing airline in the world. Their global internship program had 10,000 applicants. Cheryl, now working with an NGO, mentored young women in aviation. Amira. She got her first flight simulator session that summer. She kept a photo of Elias taped to her wall. And Elias, he stayed quiet, focused, rooted, because even after owning the skies, he never forgot the feeling of being told to go back. The sting of erasure, the shame that wasn't his to carry. And now, every time he boarded a flight, every time someone saw him and smiled instead of scowled, he knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about revolution, one seat at a time. 3 months later, Elias Carter stood at the construction site of Skyward's newest terminal in Lagos, Nigeria. The foundation had just been laid, but already the vision was alive, a terminal designed by local architects, powered by solar panels, and featuring murals celebrating African aviation pioneers. Children watched from behind fences, waving at the cranes and workers, pointing at the signs with the Skyward logo beside Elias's name. Standing beside him was Nana Bayo, a young Nigerian architect who had been told she was too ambitious to design for an international firm. Elias had found her portfolio online. "You built this," he said. Gesturing at the plans spread across the table, Nana smiled, still not used to being seen truly seen. "You gave me the chance. I opened the door." Elias corrected her. "You walked through it and started redesigning the whole damn house." She laughed, but her eyes glistened. The two of them walked the site as the sun set over the horizon, painting the steel beams gold. Children ran barefoot across the red earth behind the fence, tracing imaginary planes through the sky with their fingers. Elias turned to her. "One day, some kid's gonna fly through this terminal you built and feel like the world finally made space for them." Nana looked out at the dusk, eyes shining. "And they'll never know they almost gave up until they saw someone like them at the top." Back in the States, Skyward had become more than a company. It was a symbol. High schools invited Elias to speak. Ivy League universities taught case studies on his leadership. Former doubters now stood in line for a handshake. Politicians quoted him. He didn't care for that kind of spotlight, but he used it. He launched a $100 million initiative called the Runway Fund, a venture capital arm of Skyward dedicated to funding aviation startups founded by people of color, women, and veterans. Applications poured in. One in particular caught his attention, a startup run by 3 black teenagers from Detroit building affordable drone technology to deliver medicine in underserved areas. Elias flew to meet them in person. They pitched him inside a garage with peeling paint and a table made of milk crates. After listening, he stood, clapped slowly, and said, "You're funded." One of the teens, Malik, started crying. "You mean you're serious?" "Son," Elias smiled. "I didn't come all this way to waste." Back at Skyward headquarters in New York, Sienna stood in Elias's office, holding a letter. "You got something you'll want to see," she said. Elias looked up from his desk. "Good or bad?" "Depends," she said with a grin. "It's from the White House." He raised an eyebrow, opened the envelope, and read the letter slowly. Then again. "They're offering you the Presidential Medal of Freedom," Sienna said. "They want you to speak at the Rose Garden." Elias leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The skyline was lit up with planes blinking in the distance, some skyward, some not, all chasing something. "Should I RSVP?" Sienna asked after a pause. Elias gave a quiet chuckle. "Tell them. I'll be there. But I'm bringing company." "Who?" "All of them," Elias said. "The janitor who cleaned the gates, the teenager who built the drone, the girl with the beads, Nana, Cheryl, the pilot who was told he'd never fly commercial because of his accent." Sienna's eyes widened. "You're bringing a movement." "I am a movement," Elias said softly. At the White House ceremony, rows of seats were filled with faces that rarely got past the gates. Students, mechanics, flight attendants, dreamers. The president handed Elias the medal and stepped back, but Elias didn't move. He turned to the podium, metal shining against his dark suit, and spoke not with a booming voice, but with quiet power. "They kicked me out of first class," he began. "They said I didn't belong. They tried to shrink me." He looked out at the crowd. "But I knew who I was. I knew whose shoulders I stood on. And I knew I didn't come from nothing. I came from everything." He pointed to the rows of guests he'd brought. "These people aren't just my guests. They're the ones building the next era. They don't need a medal to prove they belong. They need a seat at the table and a voice on the speaker." Thunderous applause rose. Elias stepped away from the mic. He didn't wave. He didn't pose. He simply walked down the steps and hugged Amira, now almost 15, standing beside her mother in a new airline jacket, part of Skyward's youth ambassador program. "I'm gonna fly a real plane one day," she whispered in his ear. "I know you will," Elias replied. "And when you do, don't wait for permission to fly first class. You build it." Months passed. The world kept turning. Elias turned 60 on a flight to Tokyo. The crew surprised him mid-air with cake and a recording from his mother back home. He grinned and wiped a tear. But he didn't slow down. Skyward launched Wings for All, their most ambitious program yet, offering free pilot training for 10.00 underserved youth worldwide. It took 5 years to build. It would take lifetimes to see the full results. But Elias wasn't building for applause. He was building for legacy. And one winter morning, he visited the very first Skyward Aviation Academy, now bearing his name, the Carter School of Flight. He walked past a statue of himself outside the main entrance, frowning at it. "You don't like it?" Sienna teased. "It's too stiff," he said. "Looks like I'm about to lecture someone instead of lift them." She laughed. "You're impossible." He looked out at the line of kids in uniforms, bright-eyed and buzzing. "No," he said softly. "I'm just unfinished." On his final public flight years later, Elias once again sat in 1A. The flight attendants smiled. One of them was Amira, now a full captain in training. "We're honored, Mr. Carter," she said. "Anything you need." Elias smiled, leaned back, and looked around. Every face greeted him with respect, no suspicion, no dismissal, only reverence. He sipped his tea, slowly. "I have everything I need," he said. The flight took off, and as the engines roared and the sky opened, Elias Carter closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to remember that first time being kicked out of first class, that moment of shame, that seed of fire, and how it led here to the skies he now owned, not out of vengeance, but out of vision, from dirt roads to jetways, from no seat to building the fleet. He didn't just rise, he lifted a generation, and they would never be kicked out again. As the aircraft soared above the Atlantic, slicing through clouds like destiny, cutting through doubt, Elias sat with his hands folded on his lap, breathing in the quiet power of everything he'd built. Captain Amira's voice came gently over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 36.00 feet. This is your captain speaking on behalf of Skyward Airlines and our founder, Mr. Elias Carter. We thank you for flying with us today. Mr. Carter is seated with us on board, and I think I speak for the entire crew when I say he's the reason many of us are up here today. Applause rippled through the cabin, soft at first, then stronger. Even passengers in business and economy clapped. Flight attendants paused in the aisles, some holding back tears. A child's voice shouted, "Thank you, Mr. Carter," from the back. Elias gave a small, humble nod. He didn't stand. He didn't wave like a politician. He simply pressed a hand to his heart. The woman beside him leaned in. "You ever get tired of being a legend?" He smiled. "I didn't come to be a legend. I came to clear the runway for the next pilots." She tilted her head. "But you built an empire." He turned to her, gaze steady. "Empires fall, but legacies, they fly." Back on the ground, news outlets were already buzzing. Final flight of Elias Carter, a salute to the man who reshaped the skies. Photos of him aboard circulated within minutes, him sitting peacefully. Captain Amira standing behind him, both smiling. The sun behind them glowing like a halo. That evening, Skyward's global offices dimmed their lights for exactly 1 minute in tribute. Terminals all over the world displayed the same message on every screen: Elias Carter, founder, dreamer, pilot of change. Thank you for giving us wings. And at headquarters in New York, a new permanent installation was unveiled in the center atrium, a life-size sculpture of a boarding gate not facing forward, but angled upward, as if pointing to the future. Above it, etched in brushed steel, they kicked him out of first class. So he built his own fleet. Years passed. Skyward Airlines remained at the top of the industry, not just in profits, but in purpose. Its graduates filled cockpits, towers, control rooms, and boardrooms. More than 40% of their senior leadership came from historically excluded communities. A new terminal in Sao Paulo was named Elias International. Schools around the globe taught the Carter case study as part of leadership development. And in Savannah, in that yellow house with the porch and the creaking swing, an elderly Miss Thelma Carter sat holding a letter from the Department of Education. They were naming a national scholarship after her son. She smiled, tears streaming silently down her weathered cheeks. "My boy," she whispered, "you really flew, didn't you?" On the 10th anniversary of that now famous flight where Elias was told to return to economy, Skyward hosted a global live-streamed event titled Beyond First Class, a tribute to the journey. The keynote speaker, Captain Amira Carter, now the youngest commercial fleet director in the world. She stood on stage, beneath a giant screen showing Elias's face in grayscale, noble and eternal. "I was there the day he was humiliated," she said, "and I was there when he turned that humiliation into hope for all of us." She paused, then held up a small model airplane, the same one she clutched as a child at the terminal years ago. "He told me to build my own runway. And when I didn't think I had the tools, he handed me his own blueprint." Amira's voice broke slightly. "We no longer have to prove we belong in first class, because now we define what first class means." The audience rose in standing ovation. From Lagos to London, from Detroit to Dubai, people stood with hands over hearts. But for those who truly knew Elias, his real legacy wasn't in words or airports or even airlines. It was in the unseen moments. The janitor who found a scholarship in his locker, no name attached. The ex-convict who received a second chance when no one else would take his call. The elderly man on a delayed flight who was upgraded and personally escorted by Elias himself. The school in rural Alabama where children wore plastic pilot wings because one of Elias's pilots grew up in their town and came back saying, "If he did it, we can too." And then one spring morning, when the cherry blossoms were blooming outside Skyward's Washington, D.C. office. A small ceremony was held with no press, no spectacle. A marble bench was installed in the company garden. On it, carved into the stone, Elias Carter, 1960, 20 Daddy Fly, not to escape but to become. Beside the bench sat a simple bronze statue, not of Elias as a businessman or public figure, but of a little boy holding a paper airplane, gazing upward. It was the same look he had the first time he saw a jet take off, barefoot and wide-eyed outside that Georgia fence. And somewhere, as another skyward flight pierced the clouds, a young black boy pressed his face to the window, watching the sky expand in every direction. He didn't know the whole story yet, but he would. He'd learn about the man they kicked out of first class, who rose higher than they ever imagined, and he'd whisper to himself the same words Elias Carter once did, "I belong here." Then he'd close his eyes and dream, not just of flying, but of building the sky itself.